Thank you so much for coming to our session on the hidden truths of digital twin for packaging, automation, and optimization. My name is Lisa Pierce. I'm the executive editor of Packaging Digest, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Rob States, who is the partner for Stress Engineering Services and certified packaging professional, plastics engineer, and overall expert here on computer simulation and digital twin. So, Rob, before we get into our first question, please give us just a little bit of background on yourself and Stress Engineering so the audience knows.
Well, thanks for having me here today, Lisa. My name is Rob, one of the partners at Stress, and my background is in plastics engineering. Started out in corporate packaging at Procter & Gamble, been in packaging for 25 years. Did a stint at Newell Rubbermaid, or Newell at this point, where spent a lot of time in material development and process development, so spent a lot of time on the floor, and I start year 20 at Stress next week, and really doing a lot of work around consulting, where we support clients in new product development, failure remediation, sustaining engineering kind of problems. So you get to see lots and lots of different things, working with a lot of different corporations out there. So that's going to drive the basis behind the conversation here this morning.
Wonderful, 20 years, congratulations at Stress. That actually speaks very highly for the company as well. So before we get into the hidden secrets of digital twin, let's talk about the definition. What is digital twin?
Yeah, in the broadest sense, if you talk to 20 people, you get 25 definitions. But in the broadest sense, it's a digital representation of a item or process that can be executed in a lot of different kind of ways.
Okay, and I know at Stress Engineering Services, you guys do a lot of work with optimizing packages, but today our conversation is going to center around packaging production, packaging lines. Unless the folks in the audience have questions about optimization of packages, packaging design themselves, we can go into that a little bit later if we have time. Okay, so thank you for that. Rob, I have been covering the packaging industry for more than 40 years, and I remember way back when I started that there was computer simulation for optimizing a packaging line. How is digital twin different from the simulation services that you've been, companies like yourself have been offering for decades already?
Yeah, so go through the history a little bit. So Stress Engineering started doing simulation and packaging in the late 80s, so it's been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times, the vast majority of projects, thousands and thousands of projects, we do these simulations to figure out a problem, whether it was a sealing problem or a capping problem or a labeling problem, whatever it had to be. And most of those projects end up sitting on hard drives once the product launched and collecting dust. But that's been going on forever. All right, so we're in our fourth decade of doing those things. What you're seeing is more acceptance in the industry to do more of this with the need to move faster. And so it was niche players that saw the value in this work early on. But you're going to see, in the near future, it's going to be expectation that you have this. And if I look in the med device space and the pharma space, they're writing rules around how to do this.
Why are we going to have this expectation to have it?
I think it's largely driven by the fact that they need to move faster, and it's more reliable and it's more predictable in terms of schedules and cost. And in addition to that, we'll touch upon sustainability, which is going to throw a wrench in the system in terms of how people are going to manufacture in the future, and I can talk about that.
Okay. And the difference, though, between simulation and digital twin?
None.
None.
It's
okay.
a subset, right? And so it's whether it's kinematic based or physics based. If you're looking at the nonlinearity of materials, not to get too technical, but the reality of it is that's what it is.
Okay. And to me, that was the hidden secret that I wanted to expose. We're going to cover some other secrets maybe as we go along, but thank you so much for that, Rob. So we have a lot of buzzwords these days when you're talking about optimizing packaging production. Artificial intelligence or machine learning, we know are helping to improve the packaging line design and the optimization of that. How are they being used today to do that? And maybe at this point too, we can talk a little bit about how they might be used in the future, or you want to hold that for a little bit later?
Yeah, absolutely. We could touch on that. So first, I think it's important to differentiate between machine learning and artificial intelligence. Those two terminologies are not interchangeable. They are two distinct things. And even though they get merged together an awful lot. So, machine learning is really about feeding data into the software and being able to then identify items or a feature or something where the software then will recognize it. And so you have to train it. And it's based on the training set. Artificial intelligence is really about making decisions, which it's trying to emulate what a human would do with using thinking. And there's a difference there. And machine learning is way more prevalent than AI. I had an opportunity to go to ATS. They had an automation summit last week. Everything I sat in was about AI, but everything was aspirational, right? There's a lot of hype. You look at the Gardner curve for hype, there's a lot of hype there. We do think it's coming. Everybody's preparing for it, but we don't know what it's going to look like. But machine learning is there today where it can identify, hey, is that assembled correctly or not? That tool is very good for being able to do that.
Rob, before you go on, I did have a follow-up question to what you just said. So I wonder, is this acceptance and or interest in artificial intelligence versus machine learning market specific? So for example, this event is pretty big for med tech, and that's a highly regulated industry. Do you see any difference in the interest of these technologies by market?
I think it would be driven by why they do things. If I'm in the consumer product space, I'm driven by tenths of a penny. So there's a big economic driver there. If I am in med device or in pharma, economics are important, and you're actually going to see more pressure on that, I believe, here in the future. But it's number 87 on the list of priorities. It's driven by patient safety, right?
And patient outcome.
Yeah, patient outcome, right? And so you will see that the drivers would be two different things. And in a regulated space, they also have to think about how they're going to validate that to show that they were able to make decisions from that. And that's where a lot of the challenges are. So you'll see it adopted in less non-regulated spaces first, or lower regulatory burden areas.
Yep, that's kind of where I was trying to drive you to that statement. I know that the folks at Amgen, I believe in Europe, have implemented some aspect of AI. I thought it was for packaging line inspection, and I've reached out to them several times, have not had any luck in hearing back from them, unfortunately. But yeah, that was one instance that I was really surprised. AI in a pharma application already? Wow, okay. So thanks for explaining all that. We're going to move on. Oh, unless you had some more, I think I interrupted you.
I'll just add one more comment here, is that I sat in a presentation at Transpac ISTA, and the Dassault folks, Simulia or Abacus, the software, they were talking about the democratization of these tools, the simulation tools. And in fact, Stress is doing that kind of work. You're going to see things available on the cloud to be able to do the engineering here. But the one thing about all these tools, particularly the simulation tools, is they do not come with an output that's a thumbs up emoji. And that's the challenge, is how do you interpret the results? And that's where maybe artificial intelligence has a play down the road as it figures out what does good look like. Right now, it resides in the head of the experts that actually do it.
Okay, I've talked about this before from a packaging perspective. I believe in AI, but I believe in the AI that stands for actual intelligence, which is people. I still think that the strength is in the people, whether it's in the people who are programming the AI, which usually are more computer engineers, techs, than they are packaging engineers. And so I think that might be where there's a little disconnect too. What do you think?
That's pretty universal almost everywhere. The domain expertise is missing. We have, and I could just tell you from our perspective of, we get to work, we have the benefit of serving many industries at Stress, and so we have folks like SAS approach us because of domain expertise, AWS because of domain expertise, ATS because of domain expertise, and that's exactly the reason why, because they don't know how to interpret the results.
Mm-hmm. So if anybody is looking for a future career where you might have a little bit of job security, that might be someplace to look. Okay, so moving on, what are some of the challenges, Rob, of digital twin technologies today and why? And then, just if you can, tell us how you're going to solve them.
So one of the things when folks have an opportunity to visit Stress Engineering, they'll get to meet the folks, but they'll see the labs. And so particularly in packaging with the polymer materials, the material properties on a data sheet are marketing literature. And so if you want to be able to do a digital twin and look at how something will seal or how it will pass a drop test based on how it's molded, that data is not available. And as soon as I change the colorant, as soon as I change maybe the sterilization, as soon as I change something, that data is no longer relevant. And so part of the challenge is having good inputs into these models. So kinematic models about equipment, those are pretty straightforward and pretty robust. But in terms of what it means for the product or the package, they don't know. And that's why I will be employed the rest of my life just simply dealing with those problems if I wanted to do that. But that is really one of the challenges, is getting the good inputs and then really understand it. And a third of our business is dealing with failure. And I deal with stuff that's been in the market for 10 years and now it's starting to fail now. And the number one driver behind that is I didn't know I needed to know that. And so if you don't have good inputs into these models or these digital twins, you will miss what's going on. But there's also an opportunity there that we'll talk about here shortly.
Okay, so follow up to that, Rob, I have to say, you yourself in Stress Engineering have several decades of this data and the experience of analyzing the data, which is key. And you've done this for customers. I would imagine in some cases you have confidentiality agreements, or obviously this is confidential information customer to customer. Is there, either within your company or within the industry, if you know of, a way of sharing non-personal data to help advance this technology for all moving forward?
Yeah, this is what I was referring to, the AWS relationship. The highest barrier to entry is interpreting the data. The second highest is knowing how to set it up. And that's where the democratization comes into play, where there will be services that you won't see from Dassault Systems or whatever. They're the engine, but they're not going to sign up for what does the product do. And so you're going to see Dassault Systems talk about it, Stress is talking about it, I'm sure other folks are talking about it, about democratizing how you go about doing these, where there will be services that actually help you interpret the data and understand the risk and dimensionalize the risk of what you're doing. And so I would expect to see more of that in the future. We're getting pressure from our clients that they don't want to do projects with us, they want solutions as we grow with them. And so that's why you're seeing these tools being developed, that you'll be able to put these out there and then people will be able to use them. And I joke, everybody just wants an app for their iPhone. That's what they really want. So you got to listen to the market and say, well, how are you going to do this and how are you going to interpret this? And to your point, when you see as many problems as we've seen, and right in your development schedules for your product and your automation is driven by your ability to identify problems and solve them. Well, when you have folks that have seen a lot of these and they're checking for those things there, they can provide you insights to help stay on schedule with your projects.
Rob, is it difficult to find new people that have those skills?
The only way we know how to do it is reps.
Okay.
You have to see things over and over and over again. You can find, I hate saying this out loud, but smart people are our commodity. We see resumes every day of very smart people, and that's a good basis. So that's good news. But it's really the reps of seeing the problem that is key, because you only model what you know to model. And so if you don't know where the landmines are or know how to go be sufficiently paranoid to go look for more, you won't find them. And that's where experience really matters.
Okay, yeah, I have to think a little bit more on that one. You don't know what you don't know, and that's in life in general, but very interesting to think about the analytical mind and the problem-solving mind, which I have to say is what impresses me the most about engineers in general, and very specifically packaging engineers. They love a good problem to solve.
And if I can add one last thing here is that there's a lot of pressure in the industry around sustainability. And so that means a pathway to sustainability is maybe a more variable resin that may be, on the plastic side, that may be a recycled resin that creates a lot of variability. And a lot of our clients, they have very extensive qualification processes from the converting to the assembly. And now the question is how do I take, and always the assumption was I had controlled inputs, right, in terms of the materials. Well, that is changing. And so these tools can be used to help you deal with that variability of things coming in and knowing how to adjust on the fly to get consistent output. And that is the frontier of what's going on today. I've been involved with many projects where they viewed putting recycled material in as just a material substitution, and that was a shortcoming, because it's also a process change and it's also potentially a product change. And if you don't respect that, you will end up burned. And that's going on. And these tools here are a way to actually facilitate it, because the normal ways of doing things may not get you there.
If it's a new material, though, how do you get the data from actual production if it's a new material? How do you simulate that?
Well, the nice thing about simulation is I can do intermediate impossibilities. So what I can do is I'm going to just say, I could say things like, well, the properties are reduced by 20% or 20% more. I could say the parts are 2% bigger or 2% smaller. I can do those and do a sensitivity analysis in the digital twin and look at what are the big knobs and small knobs that control what's important in the design and on the automation. And then you can have an awareness to then say to the right, folks in the organization saying, hey, please be aware that this is going to be more sensitive now. What can we do about this today? As opposed to let it being a happening that it eventually happens and then they have to shut down the line and they don't know what to do. And so that's what's really nice about these tools, is that I don't have to go find that variable resin. I could just go start testing it and developing specifications around that, quality systems around that, where I'm looking for this and this and this. And you're obviously inviting the experts in to understand what that range can be, right? But then I can start testing these extremes. And we see one project a quarter or so of a product that's been in the market for 10 years, and they'll claim that they haven't changed anything, but all of a sudden their quality issues go off the charts. And you look at them, and honest to God, they think nothing's changed. And in their world, it hasn't. But what they didn't understand is how much the variability could if everything's on the low side today, what's going to happen? They often didn't catch that. That's where the digital twin is very powerful to make you more aware. Remember, the number one driver of a failure is I didn't need to know that, right? And they weren't aware. And then in a lot of our clients' organizations, in terms of career development, people move around a lot, so the tribal knowledge moves with that individual and it's not institutionalized. And that's where these digital tools, particularly on the lines, go a long way, because now it's institutionalized. That engineering knowledge is now institutionalized in the systems in a way that it had not been done before.
Okay, and I can see that being very powerful for the organizations. Before we move off on this, I do want to ask though, is one of the challenges around data security and the learning that comes from that data within an organization? Is that a challenge these days?
I would say they don't want to know, because and I say that tongue in cheek, and because they might find out that their specifications are overly loose or overly tight, and they want to be very careful about that. In terms of data security, I don't get into that too much from an IT standpoint, but I do know if you want to successfully implement this goes beyond the operations group and the R&D group. There's a strong component of the IT group, which is not the help desk people. It's not. They're all within those organizations. They're spending a lot of money around that, and they obviously need to be involved. And I would just say I just respect what they do, but I'm ignorant to what extent they have to do things.
Okay. Sometimes I think they like that everybody is a little bit ignorant so that we don't ask them for too much. Sometimes. Anyway. Okay, so Rob, this is wonderful. Can you please give us an example of how you've seen this technology make a significant difference for a packaging line installation and or optimization project?
Yeah. I do a lot of work in reusable packaging, reusable packaging pooled products, let's say like a pallet or an IBC. And so part of the strategy there is to go away from a one-turn use on let's say a wood pallet to a 10-year plastic pallet, right? And we see that going on, driven by Costco and some other folks here. And so if you get into that world, there's a lot of standards that exist that people underappreciate around UL and FM. And there's ISO standards, there's ANSI standards.
UL, FM, could you explain?
Underwriters Lab
Yep.
and Factory Mutual,
Okay.
right? Because what they want to know is what happens if all these pallets burn, right? You'll see in the news, right? And so they have to put these additives in there to be able to do this. And there's these really aggressive burn tests, and that material is really expensive, and it also hurts the ductility. But they also need these things to last 100 turns or 10 years. And they also put these in edge racking conditions where they could put 2,800 pounds on there and they can't fall out and hurt someone. So, one of the things that's actually going on is they're using machine learning to inspect these pallets every time they come back to make sure they're not damaged. And because some of these things you can't physically see, and if you've ever been in a depot where they're sorting pallets, these are not engineers sorting them, and they're having a hard time with labor and things like this. So these kind of tools not only give you consistent output, but they also, are faster, but also gives them tools to be able to decide which one of their customers, is it going from CPG company one to retailer company one? Oh, look at this combination. They're always damaged when they come back. What are we going to do with this? And what you're also seeing is that actually leads to IP opportunities, because they have better understanding of requirements, and they can generate IP from that. That's a second benefit from here, but that's what's really going on, and I share that as an example.
Okay, that's a great example. Very much actionable data that is actionable. So thank you for that. I'm sure you have a lot of other examples.
Oh yeah.
But just to kind of go through this, how does digital twin and simulation really work? What are the steps that someone would go through when they want to implement digital twin?
Yeah, so my number one thing is this is not a technical problem. It's already done. All the invention is done. This is leadership-driven activity. And you have two major sets of parties that must buy into this. You must have a leadership that says we're going to support this, and you must have an organization that is set up to receive it. And if one of those is missing, it ain't going to happen. And and we've seen this an awful lot. And I'd say there's a lot of hype here because it's almost like the same conversation around sustainability. It's an interesting data point at the Transpac conference. All these companies are signing up for sustainability. Only, don't hold me to this number, but it's around this number, only 10 to 15% of the people will actually hit their goal that they've stated to the world. The same thing here, there's a lot of hype, but they're only going to do it if it delivers money. We've done 1,000 sustainability projects and 0 were done out of the benevolence of their heart. 0, right? And it's a firm number, you can bank on that. And so the same thing here is there's a lot of hype, but they're really thinking about how does this financially impact the organization? And if you don't have momentum from the top and from the organization, it'll be very hard to implement.
Rob, in your experience, which way does it usually work? Which way does it usually happen, and which way does it usually work better?
It's a difficult question to answer. Where I've seen it done, I don't know how they got there, is that there was consensus through the whole organization, and the whole organization was set up to receive it. And I've seen people in those organizations go say, I'm going to go be the leader at this other company, but they weren't set up to receive it, and it doesn't work. And so everybody ends up frustrated in the end. I think the number one thing is there has to be a recognition of how this is challenging and a strategy to overcome the challenges, and how you can't justify it on the first project, and you have to figure out how to do this in a journey in a way that is affordable that will eventually deliver. And so some people are down that pathway more than others, but it is a journey, and you'll be able to do it in pockets, but in the end, I'm not a psychologist, those individual contributors end up getting frustrated because it's not going anywhere else, and then they move on.
Okay. Do you see a lot of the successful projects being driven by the leadership or being pushed up from the packaging departments?
I would say the packaging departments would say they all agree, but they're not going to risk their bonus to do it. And so and that's partially tongue in cheek, but I mean it's a high risk proposition. It depends on how much risk you're willing to take in an organization. And so you really need to have it at the top, and you need to push this down, and you need to be able to show them the journey and the value, because they got so many things on their plate. They know this way will deliver this way, and they're more willing to sign up for that because that's perceived to be lower risk than doing something new, even though we all need to go there.
Okay, and that's kind of the high-level view of how it works and what to do to get there. Getting into the details just a little bit here, I know that there's a variety of different programs that packaging engineers use to design both a single machine and to use to put together a packaging line. From just a technology point of view, whatever programs they're working can feed into a digital twin?
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Okay.
really the definition of the digital twin. There is a lot of specialized software out there, and you have to think about what does that want to deliver, and you also have to think about what the perspective is. And so I spent a lot of time with an automation company in the last few weeks, and they use the software to make sure their equipment is reliable that they are selling to their customers. But in the end, the final consumer doesn't care. They care about the reliability of the product. And this is where you see the different silos in the organization have different lenses. They're all saying the same words, but they all view it differently. And you need to tie that together. And so all their tools are also setting up accordingly the same way, as you're referring to the tools here, the software. Mm-hmm. And someone needs to tie this all together, and I would say that that's a rare happening.
It sounds like a packaging director would be the one to do the business case and To me, that seems to make sense.
Yes, a visionary.
Okay, all right. So now we get into what I think is the fun part, is thinking about the future. So Rob, let me pick your brain on this and ask what's next and why.
So I've got to work with a couple lobbyists in my life. I'm not proud of it, but I got to work with them, and they said words to me: when you're talking about the future, you're never lying. And so I can then dream big. And so what I think packaging looks like in the future is that the packaging team's going to say, they're going to get from the product team, we need to package some kind of product, and you're going to then have automation tools that will consider cost and sustainability and startup time, which will go through, using artificial intelligence, go through and look at different packaging systems. And they'll give you a costing score and a sustainability score and all sorts of things here. And it'll automatically automate and optimize that based on known machine learning patterns. And that will then drive down. This is very futuristic. It can be done, no invention required. It just has to be the mindset to automate these things here. And some of this stuff is being automated today to go through those thought processes, where you can then go through and actually virtually validate IQ, OQ, PQ on the line electronically, digitally, and actually drive that through as part of your package. And then once it's launched, if a change occurs, you can check all your changes digitally before you go do a line trial on the line and know it's going to work out. And as I go through this process here, there's no invention required, and people do this in a very manual way, and you're highly dependent on the individuals on the team to be able to do this in the experience level. And this is sort of going to take away some of those requirements here and actually speed up development.
That is a big dream. And I have to just ask, you used very specifically the word validate, which means different things to people who are in different markets. So validate just means to prove in most cases, unless you're in a regulated industry like pharma and medtech, which validated really does mean compliant with the regulations. So do you see that? Do you see the agencies accepting, trusting digital technology as true validation for a process, a packaging process?
A great question. They're spearheading the groups that are doing it, and they're encouraging it. So, and this is, and if I hold up an unrelated packaging example, but I'll talk about cardiovascular kind of products and orthopedics. You can't prototype those and see if they work. The digital way is the way to go. The same with what's done in other regulated spaces like oil and gas and aerospace. And so the FDA has recognized this and encouraged this. There's been over 300 successful submissions using digital evidence with the new guidelines that exist to be able to do this. And so it started out in the lowest hanging fruit in the med device and pharma spaces, but there's no reason it cannot be applied here. And in fact, they would encourage it. We're part of subcommittees. There's guidelines that were put out in 2019, I believe, ASME V&V 40, which is guidelines on how do you do the digital submission. And in your pre-submission package, you actually tell them you're going to do this, and they're prepared for it. And the person who was spearheading the committee was a PhD from the FDA.
Wonderful. I would identify that as another hidden secret of digital twin then. And with that, we are at the end of the formal presentation, and we do have time for questions from the audience, if there are any. And my colleague Marissa over there has a microphone so that we can easily hear your questions. Anybody? Going once? Yes, Adrian, thank you for stepping up with a question.
Thanks, that was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Is digital twin specific to packaging automation or across the board injection molding, extrusion, thermoforming? Can you apply it to?
Oh, absolutely. For injection molding, there's been commercial software out there. I got into this world in late 90s, and the commercial software existed then. So there's very much a lot of commercial software out there to support the converting process of plastic components. And sometimes when they're basically specialized kind of CFD programs or front-end element programs that are more for folks that are not necessarily experts in predictive modeling, but experts in the industry, and they've built these very good tools. If those tools fall short, then you go step up to the next level, which is you go to the more open code kind of CFD programs. And so when like in injection molding, the software like MoldFlow, and everybody's familiar with that, MoldX 3D, all these, and they're very powerful tools. But when they fall short, then I will take it to software like Fluent or a CFD program of some sort to be able to go solve that next level problem. So just the simpler the better usually.
Any other questions? We still have time if anybody's got any questions. I have to tell you that many years ago, pre-COVID, so I can't even do the count on that. It's like we're missing years. Anyway, pre-COVID, as digital twin became a big buzzword in packaging, I thought to myself, because like I say, I've been covering the industry for so long, and I thought to myself, that sounds just like computer simulation. They've been doing that for decades. What's the big deal, right? And I reached out to the folks at Stress Engineering Services because I wanted to do this exact interview back then, and then, COVID happened and the world, went crazy. So I can't tell you, this is, years in the making. I'm so thrilled that we finally have done this. And Rob, thank you so much.
Thank you so
for
much.
doing this. Please join me in thanking Rob for his sharing his expertise here. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.